Hi, my name is Cody Deegan. I am an artist, and today I'm going to be talking about character drawing. I'm going to focus on drawing cubes. Now, a cube starts out as just a square. It's flat, it's boring. We really need to be able to draw this in a three-dimensional form to be able to use it to make drawing characters easier. So we need to be able to tilt this any way we want, whenever we want, to where it looks believable. Now in the last video, I was focused on heads, so I was primarily just dealing with spheres. And I think dealing with spheres is actually easier than dealing with boxes. So why is that? Well, with a box, we've got all these different angles going on. Like, how did I know to draw this angle like this? How did I know to draw this angle like this? And how did I know to draw this angle like this? And not only that, I've also got this angle here going this way. I've got this angle going this way. And then I've got these ones up here going this way. Look at this one going this way. And then we've got one going this way. And you might think, well, you know, they're all parallel, so that makes it easy. But if you actually look at these, they're not really parallel. Look at this one. And let's compare it to this one. One's going this way. I'll bring this over. Look, this one's actually going this way. I come over to this one, and this one's actually going this way. So there are actually three different angles just on those edges right there. This one's down a bit. This one's down a bit. So all of them seem to be going in different directions. How about these ones? If I hold here, check that angle, bring it over to here. This one comes in a bit. This one here even comes in a bit. Every single angle I drew is a little bit different from the one next to it. That's why I think drawing cubes is rather difficult. But I also think it's essential, because if you can get good at drawing these, you're going to see your skill level at drawing improve dramatically. So to understand what's going on here with a cube, we have to talk about perspective. Now with perspective, there's always a horizon line involved. So I'm just going to draw a line here. And you have what are called vanishing points. Now in a one-point perspective, you're going to have one vanishing point for each object. Well, what does that mean? I'll show you. I'm just going to pick a spot on the horizon line and make a dot. That's going to be my vanishing point. From that, I can draw straight lines coming out from this vanishing point. And I can use these as construction lines to help me draw an object that looks like it is being foreshortened or is in perspective. If you really want to get precise, you can break out a ruler and start laying all this out. But for now, I'm just going to go with this. So I'm going to draw a cube in one-point perspective. Now the thing about one-point perspective is one plane of this cube is going to utilize these angles going back to this vanishing point. Since we're working in 3 dimensions, I should probably point out what that means. We already talked about having a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. These are also considered dimensions. In math, you would have your x and your y Cartesian coordinate system. Now you can introduce a third dimension going forward and back. The y direction goes up and down. The x direction goes left and right. But then you can have what's usually labeled a z dimension. And that one is coming towards us and going away from us. The z direction is our depth. That's the third dimension. So when you're trying to draw a cube using one-point perspective, One dimension is going to be horizontal. So all our horizontal lines are going to be parallel with the horizon. We're also going to have a y dimension, meaning all lines of our cube that are going vertical are going to be parallel with the sides of our paper. They're going to be perfectly vertical. So we're going to have horizontal, we're going to have vertical, and then to represent our z dimension, that's where these lines come in. So let me demonstrate this. I'm just going to draw a cube right here, and I'm going to start with a side. And this one is going to be parallel to the side of the paper. So our vertical axis. Now I'm going to draw this over. This is going to be the front face. This way like this. And I'm just going to come to the first z-depth line that I see. It's going to be right here. And notice that that line is parallel to the horizon. I'm going to do another one right up top here, also going to keep that parallel to the horizon. Now this is not going to be square because I decided to stop at this line. However, I can make this square. I'm going to bring this over. And let's just bring out another line. You can bring out as many of these construction lines as you want. So let's go ahead and put that right there. Then from here, I'm going to come straight up, keep it parallel with the other side. And now where these two meet, it's pretty close to this vanishing point line here, but just to keep it simple, I'm just going to draw another one right next to it. Just a straight line going from that corner to the vanishing point. So now I can use these vanishing point lines for the other side of this cube. And I can decide how far back to go, whatever looks good, and then I'm going to do another vertical line to finish off the cube. I'll reinforce these lines. And now I'm going to knock down some of these construction lines so it's more evident what it is that I drew. All right, so I made a cube. And I made it believable because I used a vanishing point. And I only used one vanishing point. That's why it's called 1 point perspective. So let's do another one. If that's 1 point perspective, what is 2 point perspective? Well, again, I can use this horizon line to demonstrate this. This time I'm going to draw a cube, but this time I'm going to have 2 points. I'm going to put one over here, and I'm going to put one over here. Okay, this time I am going to use a ruler because these are really long lines and it's hard for me to keep them straight. So rather than just draw out a bunch of random lines and then try and draw a cube that fits those lines, I'm actually going to start by figuring out where my cube is going to be, and then I'm going to draw my perspective lines to it. I'm going to make this cube a little bit bigger. I'm going to give one side here. Let's just set it right there like that. And now what I'm going to do, I'm going to bring a construction line from the vanishing point to the bottom and just go carry it all the way through. I'm going to do another one at the top. Carry that all the way through. Now let's do the same thing from this vanishing point. So this is demonstrating 2 point perspective with a cube. Okay, so now from here, I'm going to go ahead and determine a length from here to the edge of the cube, and I'm just going to draw a parallel line going up like this. And then I'm going to do the same over here. I'm going to do another parallel line. I'm going to bring this one back a little bit more like this. Just notice that line wasn't very parallel. Okay, so hopefully you can see the difference now between 1 point perspective and 2 point perspective. It's almost like we took this XYZ Cartesian coordinate system and rotated it. So here you can see our x-axis The y-axis is still vertical, and then there's the z-axis. So we already know 2-point perspective uses 2 points on the horizon. How would we do 3-point perspective? So I'm going to give myself a new horizon line down here. There's my horizon line. Let's go ahead and pick a dot here. There's one vanishing point. We'll do another one out here. So I'm going to draw a line, and I'm going to put it way up here like this. So now let's kind of figure out where this cube is going to go. I'm going to draw this one somewhere in this area right here. And notice I'm not committing to any lines yet because I'm going to use all my vanishing points to help me here. So what's going to happen is the sides are going to come from this third point up here. We'll draw a line like that. And then let's come over to the other side and do one like that. So that establishes the angle of the sides of my cube. Now let's say the ground is going to be kind of like this. So let's define that with this vanishing point here. And then where that crosses there, let me line that up with my other vanishing point here. And then as far as how tall this is, I'm going to say right through there like that. So I'm going to draw a construction line there, and then where that meets, let's connect that to this other vanishing point here. So now, this is what the new 3-point perspective cube looks like. Now notice it looks quite a bit different than the other two. If you've ever seen a fisheye lens or a wide-angle lens in photography and how you get this noticeable distortion in the images, this is how you can recreate that effect. Now, once you understand this concept, then it's just a matter of experimenting with how far apart your vanishing points are, because the distance of these points from each other is going to affect the final look of whatever object it is that you're drawing. Now, you may be thinking to yourself, how can this be practical when you're drawing? Because there may be times when these vanishing points need to be very far apart. Because notice, this is rather small on my paper, and if I was looking to draw a cube larger on my paper, my vanishing points would have to be way off the paper over on my table. Now, if you're just learning this, it's not hard to put a piece of tape on your table, put a little dot on it, and then get a yardstick to help you. Because if you've never done this before, you really should practice with a ruler drawing objects using 1, 2, and 3-point perspective so you can start to wrap your brain around it. But like most of these tools that we're learning while we're drawing, they're meant to help us calibrate the ability of our eyes and our brain to work together. And the goal is to get to where we don't necessarily need perspective lines anymore to be able to draw a cube that is somewhat believable in space on our paper. So notice I didn't use any perspective lines. I didn't use them here either because in my past I've played around with 1, 2, and 3-point perspective just like this on paper. And I've started to notice what happens when you take a square and turn it in space. I notice that the edges, they taper. They're no longer parallel. They just start to taper. So it's easy for me to draw a straight line, and then instead of drawing parallel lines over like this, it's easy for me to just do an angle here and do an angle here. And then don't come all the way out to the edge because now this is getting shorter as it goes this way because it's turning away from us. I can do my parallel line just like that. And look at that. I have a side of a cube in perspective, and I didn't use perspective lines. Same thing here. This side, I'm not going to draw a flat square like I did here. If I did, it would look like this. And that's fine. This is simulating more of a 1-point perspective because these two lines are parallel to each other. But if I want to add a little bit of depth and a little bit of perspective, I'll actually come off of this point here, and just like I did here, I'm going to angle it a little bit. And I'm going to angle this one a little bit so that they're not parallel. And again, I'm not going to come all the way to the edge because this is starting to turn away from us like this. So I'm going to reduce this length, and I'm keeping all these parallel. So I just simulated a 2-point perspective right here without having to draw a horizon and do vanishing points. But again, it's nice if you're working on a drawing and it's just not quite working out right. It's nice to be able to break out the ruler and figure this stuff out so that you can draw it right if you're struggling. So now if we go back to how I drew this one you should be able to tell that this one is actually in a 3-point perspective. If we look at each plane in the individual dimensions, the sides are not parallel on any of them. All of them are skewed just a bit to insinuate that they're going back to a vanishing point. This one's going this way. This one's very subtle going this way, and this one is very subtle going this way. We checked this in the beginning. They're not parallel. You know, if we look at this one, we can see that there are parallel lines. The verticals are all parallel. And then we have 2 axes which are not. So 2 out of the 3 dimensions are not using parallel lines. That puts us in a 2-point perspective. This one has parallel lines in the horizontal and also all along the vertical. So we only have one plane right here which is not using parallel lines. So once we start recognizing this, okay, that's 1-point perspective. This is 2-point perspective. This one is 3-point perspective. And notice that this one does not look like this one. Like this one looks a little distorted. The reason it looks distorted is because these vanishing points are too close to each other. This one, the vanishing points are very far away. If I were to try and see if these are going to converge at any point on my paper, I'm going to draw a straight line from that one. I'll draw a straight line from this one, and we've got convergence right here. And then this one is probably not going to hit. Yeah, see, this one does not line up right. So if I really wanted to draw this correctly, I would use this point here. And this is how I could correct myself. Now, it's not that far off. I was a little bit off. Mine's going kind of like this. So it's not perfect. When you don't use your tools, you're not going to be as accurate. But sometimes you don't need to be as accurate. Now let's check these other ones. This one's going this way. Going up. This one is going this way. So these are not going to converge on the paper. Although they do get pretty close. They're going to converge right off the paper, right off there. And then there's this one here, which is going like this. Now clearly this is a problem because I can already tell these two here are going to converge right off my paper here, and then this one is going to converge behind it. So I really feel like this one needs to be more like this if I want to be more accurate with my perspective. This is how you would check yourself if you felt that things were a little off. And what's nice about doing this is now I can see that I had things a little bit off, and that's going to help me calibrate my vision for the next time that I do this type of perspective. So hopefully I'll get it a little more correct the next time. So it's always good to check yourself. So this one was actually quite a bit closer. This one still needs to come just a little bit like this. It seems like I'm always getting the furthest line away as being just a little bit off. This one should actually be going that way. But for the most part, this is still a believable three-dimensional object. The reason I chose cubes is because last video I was demonstrating how to draw the head. This video I want to take it a step further and I want to work on the torso. When you're character drawing, it's always easier to draw with shapes because the shapes will help hold the form. They're a great foundational element. They make your drawings look stronger when you're all finished with them. I'm going to be drawing the torso for our mannequin figure just using a cube shape like this for now. And the reason for that is this is going to really help you start getting a grasp of the 3 dimensions. Getting your mind out of 2D space and into 3D space can be a little challenging. I feel like it can be the most challenging obstacle in the process of drawing. Now, drawing a figure straight on is much easier. So here for the torso, I'm just going to use a box, looking at it straight on. What makes this easy is I've got all parallel lines. And so it's easy for me to gauge whether or not I've drawn it correctly. For the pelvis, I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to do another box right here. And to keep things simple, I'm going to keep the width the same as the torso. And then I'm also going to use parallel lines. Immediately, mistakes should become evident. My center line was drifting. I could tell because one side over here was shorter than the other side over here. If you're going to draw a character in a different perspective, I think the first thing you have to decide is where, as a viewer, are we located in relation to this character? So even before I start drawing, I have to decide, okay, I want to be up above this character looking down. Okay, that helps, but then what direction is the character facing in relation to me? Sometimes it's easier to just start with a basic stick figure, and you have to try and imagine what this character looks like on the paper before you draw it. Now, you don't need all the details, you just need the basic orientation. So here, I'm drawing the center line, like the spine, and then I'm moving down and I'm imagining like the shoulder line. The shoulder line is going to help me orient the direction of the character. Now I'm looking down. This is going to start getting complicated because I have to start thinking about all the individual parts. Here, I was able to keep everything equal. Here, I have to start thinking about things that are closer to me. So when I draw this shoulder line, I want to make sure that the portion that is farthest from me is shorter than the portion that is closer to me. Another thing I have to think about is if I'm looking down, everything is going to taper, right? Kind of like that road. It's getting further away, so it's getting smaller. So construction lines can be very helpful in this sense. So since I have a shoulder line, let's go ahead and redraw those construction lines going through the shoulder line. So this one's going at this angle here, and let's just adjust that angle over here like this. I don't want to get too extreme. Well, what's the right amount of angle between these two? There's not really a right answer for that. It really depends on how exaggerated you want the image to look. The greater the angle between these two, the more of the fisheye look you're going to get, the more distortion you're going to get. If you want it to look a little more natural, don't angle these apart so much. Get the angles a little bit closer. I'll go ahead and just widen this out a bit. And I'll widen this one out a bit. This is more subtle. This won't be as extreme. Now my center line, now that I've drawn those in, I didn't really draw them in very well in relation to this center line, because this center line needs to stay looking like it's in between these two. So I'm going to adjust that. I had two options there. Either redraw my construction lines or redraw the center line. I just chose the easier one because I didn't think it would make that big of a difference. So this is already helping me establish how I'm going to draw the torso and the pelvis in perspective. And let's just keep things simple. Let's go ahead and keep all these horizontal lines of the body parallel. So how far down do I come for the torso? If we look at this in comparison to this, I've made the circle about the same size. So I could look at this torso and I could think, well, if I make it that same size, that's going to be too big, right? Because it needs to get smaller as it gets away from us. So this is more of a matter of logical guessing. And you can even try, if you're new to this, you can try different sizes. You can try it different ways. What I suggest, though, is testing the boundaries, the extremes. Know when it's not tall enough and know when it's too tall. For example, like this, I feel like that is not tall enough. It's too short. Because look at the relationship between the width and the length. If we were to imagine this looking straight at us, it would probably look like this. That's the impression I get when I look at how I just drew this. Let's make it too long. To me, that's automatically way too long. That's just as long as the torso looks when you're looking directly at it. It's just obvious. So it's a matter of making sure you're not hitting those extremes and keeping it somewhere in the middle. And usually after you draw it, you can just look at it and decide, does that look okay? And after a while, the more you do this, you won't even have to think about it anymore. So let's go down to the pelvis. We have a space in between the torso and the pelvis. This will represent the length of that space. So again, I have to think, where do I put this next line? And again, I'm keeping all these lines parallel just to keep things simple. I don't want to go way down here because now look at this space in relation to the torso. This is a small space. And again, I don't want to go too small. I still want to make it obvious that there is a space between them. But it's got to be a little bit smaller than this because it's going away from us. So to me, this looks pretty good. May not be perfect. Doesn't have to be perfect, but it's got to be believable. So now the height of the pelvis. It's not too bad. I might come up just a little bit. And these construction lines are helping me keep them lined up. It's helping me keep the pelvis and the rib cage lined up. So now we've got kind of a flat version. We need to be able to put in the tops and the sides to make these look three-dimensional. What I want to do is just come out like this and I can use parallel lines again in this direction, parallel line this way. This one's not parallel. I actually tapered it a bit because it's going away from us out of habit. So this is what I want to do with this one, and that will turn it into a cube, and then I can just go in and erase the interior lines. So then, if you haven't done this before, this begs the question, how do you know which angle to make these lines at? These ones aren't too bad, right? Because they're almost parallel. This is almost parallel. Granted, I have them tapering a bit at the bottom. I have them tapering a bit as they go away from us. But they're almost parallel, so those are easy to get. The tough ones to figure out are these ones right here. How do I know what angle to do those at? And what I think helps, like I mentioned before, is testing the extremes so you can start to recognize what doesn't work and what does work. There's actually a lot of room for error in determining these lines. So let's say I decide to do an angle like this. Now I just did this one and this one looks pretty good. So I would think that doing an angle like this, where these are going back like that, would make this look completely wrong. But when I draw it, surprisingly, doesn't really look all that bad. So that's why I say there's a lot of room for error for this. So don't feel like you have to get these perfect. Now, I do feel like this is wrong. I don't really like this because what we're going for is a right angle, perpendicular lines. When you've got one line that goes this way and another line that comes in at a 90-degree angle, how these intersect is called perpendicular. Now, because we're dealing with a cube, there's a lot of perpendicular lines going on. But all that starts changing when we start rotating the box in space. Because now it's hard for us to tell where 90 degrees is. Now, I can tell you right now, this is not it. This looks to me a little closer. This comes up here and then goes this way. Now, in reality, if I were just to measure the angle right here between these two, no, this would not be 90 degrees. I can demonstrate that with the corner of my ruler. If I hold my ruler right here and look at the corner, this is not 90 degrees. This is, because we're looking at it straight on. But when we start altering the angle of things, we start losing our ability to measure those angles. And I think that's what makes it hard to draw in 3 dimensions. But what helps is this room for error. So even though this is wrong, it doesn't look that wrong. So that makes it a little easier to start drawing things in 3D space and start developing your eye, start noticing what looks right and what doesn't. So let's do the opposite. Now let's go a more extreme angle this way. And I'm going to draw these construction lines pretty close to parallel. And then this one down here would follow them as well. So look at that range between that. This was the first angle I drew, and this is the new angle I drew. Look at how much range there is between these two angles. And looking at the final product, it doesn't look that bad. It doesn't look that off. But it is off. It's not right. But it doesn't look that bad. So just know you've got some room for error when making the decision on these angles here. Notice too how I didn't put the head or the circle right dead center on this center line. There's a reason for that I guess I could mention now. And that is that this is going to be a side view. When you look at the side view of a human skull, the neck sits right here, like the spine. Right in this area here is where the head rests on the spine, like that. So notice how it's further back. It's not centered. So that's why this circle is not set dead center on this. So keep that in mind too when you're drawing these preliminary shapes to help you with your character drawing. All right, so I did 2 extreme angles trying to figure out how to draw the depth of this box. So now I'm just going to kind of go right in between them, and I'm going to choose an angle more like this. And then I'm going to draw parallel construction lines to that. And again, I am changing them slightly just out of habit. I really think you should get into this habit as well. When you're drawing a shape that's getting smaller as it goes away from you, and you're starting to draw your construction lines for the depth, just change them just slightly, just subtly. It's going to add so much to your drawings. Okay, so now that I have that in, now I can go ahead, draw the front plane of this box using this as a guide and using this one as a guide to get the sides down. Let's go ahead and line those up like this. And then use this back one as a guide to come down kind of parallel. You could even taper it just a bit because we know it's going away from us. And then I'm going to draw out from this corner here the construction line, because that tells me where to stop this line, and then connect them over like this. Now what's happening is I've got too many lines and I'm going to get confused. So I need to do some cleanup here. And immediately, look what I noticed. The very first thing, which is something that should have been addressed when I drew it, is the center line for the spine. I'm noticing that the distance between here and here looks the same as from here to here. And I talked about that. This needs to be more over on this side so that this side is longer. So I missed that. But while drawing the box, it's good that I caught it, because otherwise things would have started looking wrong. Now where this neck hits the top of this box, I'm going to go ahead and come out this way. Again, trying to stay parallel to these depth lines. Come out like this, and then create a new center line on this front face. I picked a spot down here for the center, again making sure that this distance would be a little shorter than this one. You'll notice what I did, I added a face to the front of what I had already drawn. But the reason I chose to add it forward is going back to this right here. When the neck goes into the spine, the rib cage sits in front like this. So when I'm drawing my box, it's more beneficial for me to have the mass of that box in front of the neckline. Do a little bit of upkeep. I still feel like this is sticking out a little far. I'm going to go ahead and bring it back in. And that there and there. And now I'm going to bring this line more like that. All right, so there's the torso. Let's go ahead and finish up with the pelvis. I can just take and follow this line down because it's going to be lined up with the front of the pelvis. Parallel line going this way. Connecting the bottom of the pelvis. This will be coming up like that. Another parallel line going across like this. That'll connect up like that. And then let's get a parallel line over here going like that underneath. So this is the top face of the pelvis under here. I'll go ahead and just shade that so it's a little more obvious what's going on. And then it helps to have a center line. So I'll just follow this one straight down. Make sure they line up. So just follow it straight down. That way everything lines up. So that's one approach to drawing this in perspective. You can do the exact same thing from the other side. I would start with a head here, and then my camera angle, let's say I'm down low and I'm looking up this way. So I'll take the center line, give me the general direction that I'm looking up in, and then get that shoulder line in. Like this. Keep this one shorter. And then let's go ahead and add some construction lines that are close to being parallel with this, but widening as it gets to the end. Do this on either side. And those are my construction lines that are going to help me keep things in perspective. So then I'll find a line drawing parallel with the shoulders that I think would be good for the height of the torso. And then I'll come down the space for the pelvis. Notice things are getting bigger as we get further down. So my pelvis is going to look a lot bigger than it did here, because now the pelvis is closer to us. But I'm still trying to maintain that proportion. And by proportion, I mean I'm looking at the relationship between the length and the height. But I'm trying to maintain it in a sense of perspective. So even though it's not going to be identical, when I look at it, does it look the same, only rotated and pointed away from me? So it's still got that rectangular feel to it. You know, it's more like a horizontal rectangle, and the torso still feels like more of a vertical rectangle. As long as I'm maintaining that, I think I'm good. Now, to get these depth lines, again, like I talked about here, I feel like if I went straight across like this, I feel like that's wrong. That's not the right angle. And then if I'm steep like this, that's not it either. It seems like to me I can get away with bringing this angle through there like that. That looks pretty good. And when I'm happy with that, I'm going to go ahead and do the same on all the corners here. I'm going to try and match that angle. And then I'm going to connect them up, getting a little bit wider at the bottom. So the line's going to be almost parallel to this. Let's go ahead and start it here. But I'm going to bring it out just a bit like this so it actually gets wider, just like the road effect. Same here. That looks good. Now I'm going to connect up the corners like this. I forgot to do this one here on the pelvis. Easy enough. I have all these guidelines to help me. Now I'll do some cleanup since now there's so many lines there that it's hard for me to tell what's what. Let's get a center line in. Doing this roughly because I'm not 100% sure where it needs to go, but I'm just, as I draw it, I'm comparing the two, making sure one looks a little wider. Make sure it looks centered, and again, make it line up with the one on the pelvis. Okay, so there's two different methods for drawing your pelvis and your torso preliminary shapes in perspective. Now, normally when I'm drawing characters, I don't draw my torsos this way. A lot of the times, I will draw torsos more like a rib cage shape, like this, almost like an egg. And we'll eventually get to this point where we're drawing torsos like this, but I find it's actually easier to start drawing torsos like this, and then once you get confident at being able to draw these in any sort of position, then it becomes easier to draw something like this. So this is nice because it immediately sets the orientation for the figure. Doing the boxes is great too because you can do the pelvis as well. The upper torso and the pelvis, they're always working together and they create a lot of dynamics in your figures. So if you can orient them correctly to each other, you're going to have stronger figures. And I just find that controlling that orientation when you're first learning, it helps to just simply use boxes. So what I've done here is I've got the torso kind of going in this direction here, right? But then when we look at the pelvis, I've rotated it just a little bit So it's actually going in a different orientation than the rib cage. And I've also got it to where it's rotated back a little bit. You know, we've got a little bit of bend in our waist. That's why I find using these boxes is much more beneficial if you're struggling drawing figures. What you should do is you should practice drawing boxes or cubes in all manner of orientations to where you feel comfortable drawing them without even hardly thinking about it. It's going to be hard at first if you haven't done this before. But this is probably one of the most important skills you can develop as an artist, because this is going to put you in control of your drawings. Notice how I'm tapering the lines here. They're tapered because, again, this is going away from us. We're almost looking up. I know this is hard at first. I really do, because I remember struggling with the transition from 2 dimensions to 3 dimensions. But if you keep working at it, I really think that it should click. I mean, it clicked for me. It took a long time. But it just clicks one day in your brain, and suddenly it just becomes really easy to draw things believably in 3 dimensions from different angles. Now, each one of these drawings, I'm very purposefully offsetting the pelvis box with the torso box. I'm doing that on purpose because you really want to be able to draw these two independently of each other. Again, so you can get more dynamic poses out of your characters. And I talked about this a little bit in the sphere video when we were drawing the head and trying to imagine where the ear was on the other side, even though you don't see it. That becomes very useful with boxes as well. And so I'll give you an example. I'm going to imagine, I'm just going to draw this line going over like this. So this is looking through as if this box is transparent. I'm just connecting up the corners so that we can kind of see that other side. So how does this become beneficial? Well, when I get to where I'm drawing the whole body, I'm going to do a center line right here. The center line on that back plane, let me go ahead and erase, connect those corners like that. So now it's like we're looking through this. Now, I'm going to draw a center line on the back. Let's say that the side we can't see is the back, and I'm going to just kind of try and guess where the center line is on the back, because that would be where the spine is, and I'd like to know where that is because I'm going to come off of that with the neck. So now, by drawing through these objects, you can better place things. I like to imagine the center of this top part of this box right here, find the center line of that, and where it crosses the edges, right there and right there, that's where I like to bring up the trapezius, like that. So that's why being able to see through your object and imagine where everything's at is so very helpful. It's just going to make your figures much more believable, much stronger. Go to the front, do a front center line like that. Divide this up here. Do some rib cage lines like that. Do a nice swoop on the pelvis like this. Okay, so granted I just made this pose up as I went. I really had no direction for where I was going. I had just drawn those boxes, and so I decided to add a few cylinders for the appendages just to see what I got. But hopefully you can see that it's a lot easier to draw a figure using shapes. And it's a lot of fun. I really enjoy using the construction method to create characters. I feel like it gives me a lot of freedom. I feel like I can draw a figure in any position without too much difficulty. And the reason for that is because I understand the perspective and I'm able to manipulate these basic shapes like spheres, boxes, and cylinders in three-dimensional space. Once you can do that, I feel like that just unlocks a whole new world to your drawing.